If you want to write more consistently, then follow this simple method. It helps you write clearly and creatively, but still be within a format for a sales letter that converts. I'm Justin Hitt with Ad Briefing's Copywriting Tips. I want to share with you a very powerful strategy. And by the way, as I describe these strategies and these resources, you can get free resources, free tips, examples of these materials by visiting the website at www.adbriefings.co.uk/contacts and simply ask your question, and I'll be more than happy to send you a practical example. So for example, right now, we're going to talk about an easy way to start writing, and it really comes down to building out that sales letter first. It doesn't matter if you're going to write something like a position paper or you're going to write a book or a special report. You want to write a sales letter first because you want to sell not only yourself, but the other person, the reader, on the value of engaging with your content. Now, this slows down to work a little bit, but it helps you be more organized and it helps you get the right insights together so that you can basically write words that sell. So I saw a video today and it really clicked in my mind a concept, and it was how the establishment gets you to lie for them. So that's kind of the headline I saw. I wrote it down in my headline swipe, and I thought about it, and I was like, yes, there are ways that people in power create narratives that influence general behavior. And so I said, well, maybe this is going to be useful. I have a special report on one of my other newsletters about how to be free in an unfree world, how to think independently. And this is kind of a tangent, but a complementary to those themes. So I use this formula that I'm going to teach you here today in order to get on paper the concept. And here's really the big idea of the concept. So here's what you start with first. You start with that big idea. What's the big idea of your piece? Well, the big idea here is those in power sell a narrative that keeps them in power. It is conditioning that helps reinforce their established position as superior. So that's the big idea. Now, I've captured the big idea on paper, and I'm going to teach you this method right here on this podcast. It doesn't take much to learn it. But what it does is it helps you vet ideas before you get emotionally involved in a piece of copy. So I write down this big idea based on a headline. It's just, people ask, where do your ideas come from? Well, they come from questions from subscribers, readers, and clients. They come from conversations with private clients. They also come with headlines that pique interest aligned to something else I've already worked on. But you can't just have a headline that piques interest. You have to extract from it what's the big idea. So in the concept of how the establishment gets you to lie for them, the big idea is that they're doing this as a behavioral reinforcement of their position as so-called establishment. And then I start making my notes. So I go down and what are the methods in which? See, if I'm writing an educational report, maybe it's an info product, maybe it's a special report describing the benefits of a product. We have to ask the question, why is this big idea the way it is? And what mechanisms do they use? And that's really the body of your report. So it could be 27 mistakes to avoid when trying to grow your business. It could be 7 surefire ways that small businesses get new customers. See, you're a marketing professional. You might be writing a report that you're going to offer for free to people who listen to your podcast, who visit your website, or who, when you're interviewed by another platform, you offer this as a free gift. You can start with writing the paper, but again, we need to vet whether it has the influence power. See, you don't ever want somebody to get the 27 mistakes and they read it and they're like, oh, great, I'll avoid these mistakes. And then they stop. You need them to read it and say, I have to avoid these mistakes, but I'm going to need help from, let me see who the author is. And then they're going to contact you and become a lead in a sales funnel. So you don't want to stop at the big idea, and you don't want to just start writing, but you need to start grabbing these bullets. So it could be the tenets. It could be the influencing factors. It could be the mistakes. It could be just random notes. But at some point, you have to stop. And what I usually use is one written sheet of paper. is once I get to the back side of the paper and I'm out of paper, I stop and then I take the next step. This next step is evidence of you being a mature and qualified writer, because what it does now is it says, well, we have some ideas rolling around there. There's enough interest or talking points to fill a whole page. Let's see whether or not this has value to the audience. Because again, you got to get their attention. You've got to keep their attention, and then you've got to persuade them to take an action. So what's the next step? Well, I work from the problem, pain, solution, action model. Now, you could use an AIDA model: action, interest, desire, attention, interest, desire, and action. It doesn't matter which model you use, but we're using a concept that has to do with focusing our thought and limiting the amount of time we can brainstorm about these key points. So I have a short title for this report called Influence of Power. I write problem and then 5 dashes, pain, 5 dashes, solution, 5 dashes, and action, 5 dashes. Now, again, if you contact my office and you ask about this writing method and you refer to this podcast, I'll be happy to scan these papers and send them to you. Because one thing I was a little surprised with, and I'll share it at the end of the podcast, I was a little surprised that when I went through this exercise that it taught me something about the persuasive nature of the big idea, of the core concepts. So problem, I write down here, this is a problem statement. And you only have one line to put it on. You have to come up with 5 ideas. And it comes down to problem. Media makes it difficult to know what is true. That's a problem. See, these are talking points again, but not talking points on the content of the report or article, but talking points around the persuasion that you'll put in a sales letter. And my theme here, and I heard this in a couple master copywriters and some mastermind programs I've been in, my concept here is if you can't write a sales letter, don't write a 50-page book. Don't write a 100-page book. You've got to be able to write a sales letter to at least convince yourself that it's worth writing the entire report. Otherwise, why write the report? So again, I have 5 problems and then the pain. The pain is translating those problem statements into what does it mean for the reader. So if media makes it difficult to know what is true and what is false, and once somebody gains power, they hunger to stay in power, what's the pain? Well, it could be if you don't recognize these influence models, you could be tricked. Of course, nobody wants to be tricked. These models could be used for good or as well as bad. How do we make sure they're being used for good? See, those are the pains. Those are the frustrations people are going to interact with. Now, again, it could be any formula. It could be Gary Halbert's star story solution. In this case, I'm using Dan Kennedy's problem, pain, solution, action. Now, the solutions are going to be invalidated. And they're going to take the problem, and they're going to take the pain, and they're going to counter it with what the common person would do. So if you can't trust the media and political figures are spending more time building power than actually doing real work, well, what's a solution? Well, you could be cynical and not believe anything that's being told to you. See, that's not necessarily a good solution, by the way, because that's not on my original list of things to look for. It's basically saying to the reader, you got a lot of choices. One of the choices, you could do nothing. One of the choices, you could be just cynical. But again, we have to invalidate the solution. If you do nothing and you allow people in power to perpetuate power rather than doing using that power for good, then you're going to be in a weaker position. You're going to be taken advantage of. See, the solution is do nothing. Don't worry about it. Nothing you can do about it. But you know what? That's not going to be comfortable. That's not who you are. See, so I have 5 little lines here, and I really only have the line on the piece of yellow pad here in front of me to write it on. And if I need more space, then I can go off and write it someplace else. But again, this is about getting down in probably 5 to 10 minutes the key framework for your sales letter. So finally, what are the actions? So in this case, the actions are now going to be 3 to 5 specific steps that your reader is going to take in order to solve the big problem, to address the big idea. And this is what's important about this part here, is these actions have to be simple. So these actions also telegraph the services you can provide. So in this case, influence of power, we're talking about how people in power create narratives to persuade individuals and to reinforce their power. And so what's one of the solutions? Well, number one solution is understand the influence of power. Well, now, if I started this out with a big idea and I started bullet pointing all of the different techniques that people in power use to maintain power, then I'm basically, in this little one sheet, giving them a reason to get my report. See, I have to be persuasive in order for them to get the report, whether I give it away for free or I sell it on the website or I turn it into a book and put it on Amazon. The key is I have to help them understand, and by writing that down, it gives me a talking point. It gives me something easy to work with. If you're writing a report about 27 mistakes small businesses make when seeking new customers, one of the action items would be to work with a copywriter to make sure your communications are more persuasive. And then another tip could be make sure your call to action and order forms are clear and easy to follow so that customers buy from you now. So these actions really start solidifying, not pages and pages of work, not staring at blank pages, not gathering materials from different areas or doing any research. It really narrows down the focus, but ultimately those actions include hiring someone like you to help them along the journey. Now, of course, some of these actions really have to provide value, because once somebody gets this report on the different methods that people in power or the establishment use to make people lie for them, they'll start recognizing these keys. And then the next logical step is they'll say, well, how can I address this? So you see what we're working with here? So the first page is just simply that big idea that triggers the thought for the report. Then you're going to just one sheet of paper, bullet point all the mistakes or the tenets or the action steps needed or the things to consider, the tips, the body of the report. And then we set the report aside and we start drafting our sales letter in high talking points with problem, pain, solution, action. And now finally, we've thought about this concept for a little while. We've kind of churned the idea around. And by the way, if you're unable to bullet point these things out, then you know your big idea is not strong enough. If you're unable to create a sheet, a one-page side talking about the problem, talking about the pain, talking about the solutions. Now, you could write for days about this, but ultimately, if you can't get the basics down to write a sales letter, then your ultimate report or your white paper really is not going to have the traction. But after you do the problem, pain, solution, action, now we want to start writing our headlines. So we're going right into writing a sales letter rather than writing the final book, the final report, the final white paper. Because if we can't motivate ourselves to write the sales letter, if we can't find the value of the materials for our target audience, which is part of how you write sales letters, then we can simply stop. We don't get vested into the project because it's just not there. But when writing headlines, I try to write 100 to 200 headlines. So the headlines, one of the headlines I already mentioned is how the establishment gets you to lie for them. Well, that was a good headline. That's what triggered the whole idea, but we have to go further than that. So we have to challenge that. We have to ask, so what? What does this mean? We're drawing on the brief that we put together with the problem, pain, solution, and action to come up with additional headlines such as, are you being manipulated or influenced for your own good? See, each of these items you could easily write 4 or 5 paragraphs on. But if you stop to write those paragraphs, you're going to get a kind of a cognitive bias to continue, even if you later discover the idea isn't worth your time. But if you write the sales letter first, you can start generating leads around the topic while you're writing the report, which gives you the opportunity to do ask campaigns. It gives you the opportunity to look at your audience demographics, to look at the traction. How quickly are you picking up an audience? So other headlines include how the establishment manipulates your behavior and thoughts. That's not a really good headline. But again, we're just getting down concepts. That's why I really recommend not sitting in front of a computer, but clearing off the table, sitting there with an ink pen and a pad of paper and simply writing down key ideas. I don't need 4 sentences. All I got room is for 1 sentence from the left to the right of my piece of paper, and I fill those out. Now, here's where you start getting out your headline books. You start getting out different types of copywriting books to give you the ideas, to spark the interest. But if you can't write, you're writing 100 headlines, and if you peter out, then it's not that exciting. But if you can write 100 headlines, I assure you will find 10 or so just compelling, super compelling headlines that then you can then extract, add to the methods or mistakes or whatever you did in your first run through, and really get a solid first draft. Now, I know I've covered a lot of steps in this writing process, but that's it. That's really where you are. Once you've done these things, you now have vetted the idea to know whether or not it's to write. So let me share the surprising thing that I discovered when I started writing about this. So how the establishment gets you to lie for them. Okay, so that's a good headline to catch attention, because there's always this fight in the establishment. There's always this, I don't want to be told what to do. And my audience tends to be independent people who want to think for themselves. But when I did this breakout, I did come up with the methods in which the establishment uses to help have us lie for them. But when I got writing it all down, there isn't a self-interest for the reader that is tangible enough to be worth writing this up into a report. Now, it's going to be great supplemental materials for how to be free in an unfree world, and some of the critical thinking materials I have. But I don't believe this stands alone, because even though I have, I think, 30 different ways, I think it's really too much. And there isn't an enlightened self-interest for the reader. So the exercise that I gave you here to write a sales letter helped me see that there isn't anything really strong in this concept to get people to buy it. Now, of course, there could be some conspiracy theorist folks that'll buy it. There could be some people in political power who want to leverage these methods to maintain power, but it isn't like a large group of individuals. Now, it may work with consulting services for strategic marketing, because there are influence factors like changing the meaning of words that are useful in marketing. But again, presented as us versus them, the establishment manipulating people, I have figured out I'm not going to have 200 headlines. And in fact, the headlines start moving around to preventative, and nobody really does preventative. Preventative doesn't sell well. So what I have to do if I want to continue with this report is that I need to do a few podcasts around key concepts to see if there's any traction there. I might do a headline. If I'm really committed to do this report, I would do some pay-per-click to do headline tests and to test concepts. But I definitely need an ask campaign. So I'd go out to my list and do an ask campaign to find out if they're even asking the question, how is the establishment manipulating me? How are they maintaining power? And how can I use this information in my best interest? So again, the headlines are helping me test this concept against an audience before I get writing into the materials too much. And the sales letter gives me something I can put out in front of a mailing list or an audience to see whether or not there's any traction here. So again, I'm going to finish the sales letter if I feel compelled to do so after I'm done with the headlines. But the sales letter is all about generating leads for my general mailing list. And this is for an Inside Strategic Relations newsletter. But if I don't generate any leads and I can't produce some questions from an audience around this topic, then it's something that's going to go on the shelf. I'm going to file it. And then later down the line, it might come up in a consulting engagement. It might come up in some other thing, or it might not come up at all, but ultimately I haven't dedicated the time. See, the biggest challenge you face as a copywriter, even when you're hired by a client to do an assignment, is that once you start writing, the momentum of writing keeps you writing, but you want to write something of value. You want to write something that converts. You want to write something that connects with a buying audience, and you won't get that if you just simply sit down and write. If you sit down and write, don't have the framework, you're going to miss the core. So again, what I've shared with you here today, which is getting down key ideas, which, by the way, the big idea could come from the client, and those key points could come from the client. But once you fill up a sheet, it doesn't do you any good to write 1,000 more key points. You need to start building out that framework of a sales letter, which in this particular case is problem, pain, solution, action. And if you can't get that down on one page, then the idea isn't mature enough. It isn't firm enough to take action. And then once you start writing the headlines, you'll probably discover in some cases that the premise, the big idea, is not strong enough, or it doesn't telegraph enough benefit to the intended audience to move forward. Now, again, if for this particular topic, if I was a political columnist, or I was writing in someone else's newsletter that already had an established audience, then how the establishment gets you to lie for them is an excellent topic. And if I was writing a political fundraiser, I could point out the 2 or 3 strategies that the enemy is using to push a false narrative that we need to raise money for to fight against. So what I'm teaching you here is not how to avoid writing. What I'm teaching here is not how to kind of come up with an idea, but how to vet the ideas you have to make sure that they're connect to the right audience, make sure they're going to be persuasive enough that they're going to telegraph the best interest of the reader, and then ultimately set up that next action. If this was used in a fundraising letter, then the next action is to solicit a donation. If this was used in a white paper and the next action was a consultation, then I don't know that this topic would attract the right people, because anybody who wants to hire me for a consultation on how they can manipulate and influence people and maintain their power it's not quite the client that I'm looking for. But ultimately, again, this method that I'm sharing here with you right now, instead of spending 5-10 hours, churning over a topic, it's a methodical approach to getting your ideas on paper, building out a framework, and then I might link to it in the description, but I can show you how I'm using this form to test the idea. So again, if you're a copywriter, marketer, or business development professional, and you're writing special reports for yourself or clients, you're writing persuasive papers, always start with the sales letter. Follow this formula that is constraining the amount of work that you do in order to validate the idea first. And then when you have a solid idea, you build out the sales letter, lead generation pieces, ask campaigns before you write the report. Once you've done that, you start generating some interest, and it'll help you tailor the materials, kind of build out the skeleton of your report. And then you write the report, and then you have a ready audience to give it to, or to sell it to, or to influence with it. And this is how you build up power in copywriting. I know there's so many people telling you how to write a sales letter, telling you how to write special reports for fun and profit, or how to make money in the white paper business, but they don't teach you how to vet the idea. Vetting the idea is more important than anything else because it builds and supports the momentum necessary. The sales letter itself makes sure that the concept is persuasive, and finally gives you the framework to test what you're doing. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Justin Hitt with Ad Briefing's Copywriting Tips. I try to deliver to you practical insights to help you be more productive and help you write more copy that sells. We're available at www.adbriefings.co.uk. And if you go to the contact page and ask a question, I'll be more than happy to get you resources and materials to get you to that next level. Because copywriting is one of the most powerful skills. clear communications, it all transforms your career. I want to thank you for listening. And again, I'm here to help copywriters, marketers, and business development professionals transform words into sales.